Good evening and welcome to Face to Face. For the Newsfirst team, I'm Niresh Eliatambi. I'm delighted to welcome to the studio Elena Panaritis, who is a world-renowned economist and leader of Thought for Action. Good evening and welcome, Elena. It's lovely to have you.
Thank you very much
for
having me here today with you.
Yes, and this is your first time here in Sri Lanka.
Indeed.
Although you are familiar with our country. And to give our viewers a little bit of background about Elena, she is an institutional economist and former executive of the IMF and the World Bank. She is a policy innovator, entrepreneur, and leader of Thought for Action, which is an action think tank spearheading transformative policy reforms that reduce informality and promote growth. She is also a professor at Stanford University's Leadership Academy, and she was the chief economics advisor to the Greek government under 4 different prime ministers in Greece from 2009 to 2017. And in that role, she was the negotiator of sovereign debt and sovereign lending agreements. She is a person with multiple global awards, and she has a wealth of knowledge in the area of peace and crisis prevention from an economic point of view. So, Eleanor, let's talk about your specialty, which is peace and crisis prevention from that economic lens, where basically you're looking at the world's population and looking at the fact that it is the underlying issues are economic, which cause conflicts and cause dissatisfaction and many other issues. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Sure. So I'm an economist, as you mentioned. I studied and worked in how to manage macroeconomic stabilization in countries. Worked with the World Bank for a long time in applying exactly this process. Macroeconomic stability that was requiring macroeconomic adjustments, which you know very well what they are, since you have to go through them yourselves. And these, of course, come through fiscal stability as well. And my view was to understand how human behavior has reacted prior to a crisis. Why, in other words, have we gotten to a crisis? Yeah. And what is it we should do in order to avoid the incentive structure to repeat itself so we don't have another crisis again? And the result has been that all this analysis led me to understand that unless you have people happy in security, with security of who they are, happy about that. I mean, they recognize who they are. There is no doubt about it. There is no doubt about what they own, and then there is no doubt about the way they conduce contracts, what it is owned to them, for example. And once this is established, then you have reduced the possibility of having any type of dissatisfaction. You reduce social dissatisfaction, and you also reduce social tension. As you may know, if we are in Switzerland, you may have all sorts of religions, all sorts of
ethnicities,
national
origins,
castes, national origins, very well said. And they all work together. They're not sitting there thinking, what is the color of your skin, what is the passport that you carry, and what is the currency that you have your savings in, and what is the, your religion. And that is because it's really a country that has a very vast middle class. And the majority of the middle class is also very rich. The same thing, one could say, applies to the majority of the group of 7 countries until recently. Recently, we started having a problem of inequality, and that's where I have started really to put a lot of my effort in understanding how we can actually understand why we have inequality, because that's the actual reason of crisis, bear in mind.
Right.
Yes, so when you have inequality and you have therefore social injustice, when you have inequality and therefore you have informality, when you have inequality and as a result of it you also have inability to document properly the people. Some are documented, some are not well documented. Some people's properties are not well documented, or they are only documented in their families but not outside of their communities. So how can you make this, how can you iron all this out? All this sounds messy. So that's what I've been working on. It's a long endeavor, but thank God, since the 90s that I've been working on this, especially in the definition of what makes human behavior operate in specific ways versus other ways, I designed some processes by which we could reduce inequality, bring, in other words, the rich and the poor closer. So in other words, you basically have a bigger middle class. And that has had some very good success. That's why you said that, there have been some awards involved.
We often hear this term inequality. We see this in World Bank reports, IMF reports, but we don't necessarily see the solutions apart from what governments put up as social safety nets in their budgets and so on. But you're talking about a more long-term process, aren't you?
Correct. So social safety nets are designed for the minority of the populations, right? So unfortunately, over 70% of the world's population, which means that a lot of countries have more than 60, 80%, some of them, 55%, some others, of informality, which means that these people are either in the margins or already in the inequality. So social safety nets are not able to take care of that. They become political safety nets.
Right.
Governments decide before elections to provide to these people with the promise that afterwards this will not just be a provision, it will be a promise of change. But we have seen in our lifetime that this hasn't really occurred, right? So what I do a lot is we study the reasons why we have inequality, which is basically the reasons why we have informality, and the answer is too much bureaucracy, too much convolution, overlapping regulations, overlapping laws, overlapping administrative procedures. Go to this place, go to that place, go to that other place. The little citizen doesn't know, or an investor gets disincentivized to come and invest in a country that is so messy, so unpredictable. There is not one process for a similar, for one same, say, I want to sell my house. 3 people want to sell their house. None of these 3 processes will look alike. Each one will be individually different. So this means that there is a major problem of predictability in a country. And so that's what I'm working on. So I basically get involved in defining the reasons why we have so much overlapping and bottleneck bureaucracy. How can we simplify it? And then simplify it.
Now, you gave some interesting examples, such as Switzerland and the G7. And when one looks at those countries, yes, people are generally happier, more confident, even though they're from diverse backgrounds. That's because they have more a sense of being, isn't it?
They have trust in the system. So if you have trust in the system, that means that you trust the process that you live in, that you trust that you're going to lock your door of your house and you're not going to come back and find somebody else that has, come into the front yard, the backyard within the apartment, and you have a difficulty taking him out because you cannot really prove that this belongs to you. It's very interesting, the distinction between a G7 country and the rest is, I think, the fact that in the other countries, the formal person who believes that he is formal still has to prove why he is formal. So instead of saying, somebody came and trespassed my place, instead of the police coming to say, okay, you guys, you trespassed his place, the police would probably, or the judiciary will say, can you prove to me that this is your place? Isn't this sounding familiar?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, so this is what I do. I turn the way we look at things if you want to solve them. And then I also evaluate the process itself to create a national system, not little bits and pieces that are part of the system. So, for example, if we continue with the case of somebody came into my backyard or ate half of my plantation, you understand, like took over, or somebody trespassed or whatever, or somebody has a pure claim over your property because he found a paper 30 years ago that says that this actually belonged to him. So in this case, if you follow the tradition of the country, right, they would say, or of any normal person, you would probably have to get rid of this individual by suggesting that this individual is trespassing or he's an intruder. Instead, now we have to prove that this property belongs to me. So what I suggest is, let's figure out why this is the case. Well, because there is no normality, there is no normativity which is formal, and you can start it from A and finish it at Z. Instead, every case is a different one. So the response of the state will be, this is because this is a rural area of this specific segment of the country, which was under the Portuguese. I'm trying to refer to your audience, that's why I'm talking about that. But the Portuguese that came over in 1600s. And then the other case is related to a segment of the country where the British were under the act of this and that and something else. And then, so which one do you think will be, how do you see this as an environment that would attract foreign or local investment for that matter?
Absolutely, you're absolutely correct there. We have tied ourselves up in knots. And I think the vast majority of court cases in this country refer to property, disputes over property.
Niresh, when I go to a country to do an assessment of the informality, meaning the level, inequality is a word. It doesn't really mean anything until you have the final product. What does it mean? Poverty so much, child labor so much, informality so much, meaning people that have no ability to document themselves properly. So the first thing I do is I go to a court case and get all the cases, and we do the statistics. Usually, over 68% of the court cases are related to permits for construction that have problems, property that have trespasses or inheritance issues, and clarity of titles. So if this is the problem that is all sitting in this segment, I think, and this is the major underline for a modern society, haven't you thought why, when you travel to the United States, there are no fences around homes with front and backyards?
Absolutely, yes.
There are no fences. And no one is actually trespassing somebody's property.
That's because the system is very clear.
That's because people trust, even if there are problems in the system, which there are sometimes, there are very few and far in between. People trust the fact that this is ours and this is yours and this is the road that is common.
And no one's going to.
And no one is going to go
and say, my property is 10 feet further than the actual.
So my origins are from Greece. So I even wrote a book about it. My mother's family comes from a very rich historical part of the world. That's where Agamemnon launched 1,000 ships to start the Trojan War. I mean, the world knows about this, even if no one has actually traveled to the country, right? Yet, this whole amazing history of this place is so beautiful. However, modern place looks messy, and it's because people don't have absolute definition of what they own. So although my mom has her family house there, coming from her father, her grandfather, her great-grandfather, with a lot of fences, mind you, and a lot of trees as well, because the fences move sometimes, so they put trees, as you can understand what I'm talking about. One good day, she found out that half of her property was registered in the registry as the property of the neighbor. It took her 11 years to prove that she was the owner, as opposed to having in the judiciary the neighbor who had trespassed be treated as a trespasser. No, we had to find out if my mother was actually the owner.
I think that's a very common case in Sri Lanka as well. Only we generally take a lot longer than 11 years. Sometimes
You're not part of the
20,
EU.
25 years.
25 years.
Yeah. So that is a big problem. And this also affects access to capital, to money, to funding, isn't it? Because that's your major asset.
Well, land and property, it's not only an economic and investment type of assets, financial asset. It's your home. It's your honor. It's what I said, it's your history, right? It's your homeland. So mom is very happy to say that she comes from this very rich historical place, and that we go there for Christmas, for Easter, forever. But 11 years, the property is out of the market, right? As long as now, if this is the case for something that was found, investors don't like to go and invest in such places because they feel that maybe now you give me 25 papers that say that yes, it is clean and it's this and it's that. But because they've heard too much about this, they feel that how do I know that 5 years down the line I don't get a claim? Or 10 years down the line I don't get a claim? The investors put a lot of money and they pay a lot of people to do a lot of things, so they prefer to just do it somewhere else.
And investors have a variety of options. They don't need to come to this location or even this country. They can simply go somewhere else.
Precisely. So the key here is, and that's what I always say, if you want to become attractive, you have to become boring. So I go back to Switzerland. Switzerland is a beautiful country, extremely attractive to investors, and extremely boring in terms of you don't hear about any institutional mess or you hear other things, but you don't hear about the basic stuff, right? Like the car of somebody was sitting on the land of somebody else or trespassing and so on.
Right. So you when you say boring, it is that
vanilla.
It's without drama.
Precisely. Precisely.
Everything's very predictable.
There's no soap opera with Switzerland, for sure.
Right.
Yeah. So that's the entire. So I always tell my governors and my presidents, when I talk to them and we work together, your hero moment is the moment that, you'll go to the office and you'll all have a 9 to 5 job kind of thing. You don't have to like figure out what's happening to this individual, to this other individual, because now you just have the process by which you actually follow.
Right. And you spoke a little bit about the importance of the middle class to a nation. Could you elaborate on this? Because in Sri Lanka, during our economic and financial debacle in 2022, the middle class was virtually wiped out. So let's talk about the importance of the middle class to any country.
There is no innovation if you don't have a growing and robust middle class. The middle class in a country is the group of people that are the engine of growth for that country, because they have the constant hunger and appetite to move and innovate and do better, right? So the middle class is not really the settled. Middle class is not necessarily only a public servant. Middle class is somebody who is actually making enough to survive, has some savings, and generates a generational wealth, small generational wealth, that creates vision for his or her children to do better, right? So you have the professionals, you have the doctors and the lawyers, you have the engineers, you have the small shopkeepers, you have I would actually even call the technically developed farming being middle class. It is segmented into farming, but it's also middle class. So all the innovation, look at Bill Gates. Do you think Bill Gates was born a billionaire? No, he was born a regular middle class guy. What did he do? He had an idea. He actually had hunger. That's that appetite to want to improve, right? To do better. He had an idea. From the idea, he decides to meet more people that had similar interests to develop that idea further. They mortgaged the garage of the father. Think of that process and try to replicate it in any country outside the G7. Very difficult. I'm not going to say about Sri Lanka. You would tell me if you can do that, which I don't think you can, right? So the middle class is really, and I'll tell you also something else. If you do have a strong middle class, you can always come back from a crisis very fast.
Right.
If you don't have a strong middle class, but you have a middle class which is very much dependent on subsidies from the government, from handouts, then when you have a crisis, they're the first ones fleeing.
You are describing what happened in Sri Lanka to the T, actually, although you're talking in a global sense. We need to take a short commercial break now. I'm in conversation with Elena Panaritis, and we'll be right back, so don't go away.
මගක් හදන විට ජීවිත දහසක් ඉදිරියට යයි. ගම්මැද්ද රට නගන ජනපෞර.
පවුලේ අයියා විදියට ප්‍රශ්න වලින් පැනලා යන්න නැතුව ප්‍රශ්නවලට මුහුණ දෙන්න පුරුදු වෙන්න අයියේ. අයියා ඉන්න ඕනේ අයියා විදියට මල්ලි ඉන්න ඕනේ මල්ලි විදියට. අන්න ඒකවත් තේරුම් ගන්න.
අර සහෙන් කියන කාලකන්ණියා. උගේ අම්මා පිස්සු හැදෙනවා දැක දැක. උගේ අම්මා මැරෙනවා දැක දැක. උගේ බාප්පා හිරේ ගිහිල්ලා ඉඩම විඳිනවා ඉන්නවා බල බල. රුදාස්.
මට නවත්තන්න.
එලි මුඩ කරන්න පුළුවන් නෑ. හේරි.
කොච්චර ආදරෙන් සතුටෙන් හිටිය පවුලක්ද මේ විනාශ වෙලා ගියේ. මේ ඔක්කොම හින්දා
මගේ ජීවිතේ විනාශ කරගෙන හරි ඔයගලගේ පවුලේ නම්ව රකින්න නේද? ඒකට වෙන්න ඕන.
පුළුවන් තරම් ඉක්මනට පොරොන්දක් බලන්න ලෑස්ති කරගන්න. හෙට වුණත් කමක් නැහැ කිව්වා. බොහොම නෙවෙයි කොහොම කිව්වද මම සුදුමෙන් කිව්ව මතක් කරන්නේ. ඒක මගේ පණ මම ඒකට ආදරේ.
මේ ලෝකේ එච්චර හොඳ තැනක් නෙමෙයි. සත්තු සරපයි වැඩි. මිනිස්සු අඩුයි.
හෙට රාත්‍රී 8ට
සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්
බක්මහි අසිරිය අරගෙන නිවස්ෆර්ස්ට් අවුරුදු මෙවර කළුතර බූම්බුවල විලියම් ගොඩල්ලවත්ත ක්‍රීඩාංගණයේදී පාපැටි තරග ගමහරහා දිවීම කොට්ටපොර ජනගී ගායනය අවුරුදු කුමරා කුමරිය ඇතුළු ජන ක්‍රීඩා රැසක් සමග කළුගම් පුරවර සිරි අවුරුදු උළෙල අප්‍රේල් 18 වෙනිදා දවස පුරා සංවිධානය කළුතර දිස්ත්‍රික් ලේකම් කාර්යාලය ඇතුළු රාජ්‍ය ආයතන සමග සමනල ක්‍රීඩා සමාජය
ෆොටෝ එකේ අර කොල්ලත් එක්ක හිටියෙත් ඔය රෙල් ගේට්ටුව ගාව දූ ගෑණික දූසක.
මල හත්තිලා වයි පොළුව පස්සේ පොලිසියෙන් එළවගෙන ඉන්නවද? දැන් තමුසර කවුද කතා කරේ කියලා මම අහන්නේ. කියනවා.
අම්මා මල්ලි
හෙට රාත්‍රී 8:30ට
සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්
අප්පච්චි කලේ මනුස්සකම මුල් කරගත්තු දේශපාලනයක්. එතකොට එයා උතුරට බහැලා ඉවරයි. දැන් ඉතින් පීනන්නම වෙනවා.
දේශපාලනය කියන්නේ මහා අමුත් තැනක්. ඒකේ මුලින්ම ඉස්සර වෙන කෙනා තමයි දිනන්නේ.
ආලෝකා බලෙන් ඇප්‍රූව් කරගත්ත ප්‍රොජෙක්ට් එක ආයෙත් දන්නවද? ඩැනීගේ.
අපි ෆෙයාගක් පටන් ගමු. ඊට පස්සේ කසාද බලමු.
Do you really mean that?
කළු අහස හෙට රාත්‍රී 7:30ට සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්.
Paving paths and changing destinies. Gammata. For the people. By the people.
Welcome back to Face to Face. I am with Elena Panaritis, who is, of course, a world-renowned economist and leader of Thought for Action. Now, Elena, we in Sri Lanka, as with many other countries, I suppose, we tend to focus on our own problems, and we think that, oh, we are the only ones who have these problems. The rest of the world doesn't have these problems. And then we try to come up with homegrown solutions. And that is not necessary. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. And with Sri Lanka's debt restructuring, again, it was a new area for us and a bit of a learning curve. But you yourself had extensive experience in Greece, holding a very senior position where you advised on the restructuring of debt there.
Yeah, well, before we even advised the restructuring of debt, I've worked with, as I told you, with other countries as well that have had debt crises, sovereign crises. We call them sovereign crises because you can have debt crises that are emerging from different purposes for different reasons. So in our case, we had a debt crisis that was generated because of lack of structural ecosystem that allows productivity to grow.
Right.
So unfortunately, it was misdiagnosed originally, the crisis in Greece. It was diagnosed as a crisis of liquidity. So we pretended the diagnosis was as if this was again Switzerland or Germany, pretended to like had all its production machine steamingly in productivity, and then it got too hot, so it ran out of liquidity. So we needed to slow down a bit the productivity. That's what you do. When you don't have liquidity, you try to slow down your productivity a little bit by doing high taxation, creating deflation, try to go back to reduce your money supply. It's really very painful process, unfortunately. So it was interesting because that was the reason why we actually got into a deeper crisis, because we followed a very deep austerity project. I don't know if I should call it a project, but it turned out to be one. A deep austerity schedule that it should have, if we had a liquidity crisis, and being a first world G7, in the Eurozone, in the 27 countries at the time, part of the Euro, in about 6 to 8 months, we would have come back to normal. But we didn't. We deviated further. So we started with reduction of -1 GDP growth to -11 GDP growth. Yeah? And that was because the solution was actually fueling further the problem. The debt, therefore, it wasn't really an issue of starting to do a reduction of debt yet, until debt became much bigger. In that case, we got to the point where we had to do debt restructuring. Again, we are not operating in America, where the markets and the banking system is much more open and free. We're operating in the European Union, where the banking system is more monitored, is highly regulated, and the debt of Greece was, as the debt of France, as the debt of Portugal, as the debt of Spain, is actually purchased by banks within Europe, because there is kind of like a common agreement with the ministers of finance, buy Spanish paper, buy Greek paper, buy 2-year, So it wasn't easy to go and present as one of the processes of giving some air to the country, the debt restructuring. So the debt restructuring was, if you like, an emergency relief situation that came because we followed the wrong solution in the very beginning, and we increased the debt more than the original debt we had. Is this right. Understood? Yeah. So then the solution we should have done, and we finally started doing slowly, is simplification of the procedure of production, growing the middle class, creating a robust property rights system, promoting as much as we can innovation through the promotion of the middle class. It took us 3 bailouts, 3 structural adjustment lendings. How many do you have so far here? 1 or 2?
Oh my goodness, quite a lot.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, so we got 3 of those, and it's funny because the first was supposed to be just for exactly a year. The second one then we're still under a lot of debt right now, although we did restructuring of that. We have done, it took us a long time to start doing the proper restructuring of the regulatory frameworks, of the bureaucracy. Only recently we start reducing a little bit bureaucracy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that sounds very much like what happened in Sri Lanka, because we had 2022 and 2023, we had high taxation was brought in, inflation was reduced, and austerity measures, and it ended up with inequality growing bigger and bigger. Yes.
We had actually in Greece the same thing, and that is happening now in the rest of the countries of Europe. All the middle class, all the professional middle class left the country. So here you're having another problem, which is happening all the time.
Right.
If you have the bad economic development solution, you end up having results that unfortunately the economists did not think of before.
Yes.
What are these results? You have the productive middle class that has been educated in the country with the money of the state, exported, leaving the country. So you have an export that you don't get paid for.
Yes.
So it's kind of like a dead taxation.
Yes.
Right? So we had a lot of that. This is happening now in Germany, believe it or not.
Right.
Germany is having 12% poverty level. Can you believe that? And this is squeezing a lot the middle class, because that means that the middle class is shrinking. So the taxation can only be taken from really the productive part of the country. And they feel that we're not going to keep working to be taxed. So they take their shoes and their baggage and whatever, and they fly out and they go to London, or they go to America, or they go.
Yeah. That sounds so familiar. And I'm afraid we're almost out of time, but I do have one more question, because one of the many things that you have done globally was actually work on Middle East processes as well, and we are right now in a big mess, or the world is in a mess over the Middle East.
Correct.
But again, you looked at peace processes through the lens of economics.
So I was involved, and still am, since 1999 as in the second tier of the peace negotiations between Israel and Palestine, and that involved Jordan and Egypt and every other place. My take has always been that we need to provide enough stability for the middle class of all these countries to feel secure. So once we do that, there will be less friction, between ideological questions. This actually worked quite well after the Second Intifada. It was working quite nicely until, of course, everything was blown out on the 7th of October. Right now, in relationship with this really, it looks like it's very early to talk about the Iran war, but it looks like we really need to concentrate in creating an economic paradigm that will put all international organizations focus in how to establish a lean system of bureaucracy of the state that gives permission to the citizens to participate in the state instead of being informal. Once you participate in the formal economy, you have no questions of not wanting to pay taxes because you trust the state. If you are part of that middle class, you start, developing, evolving. You don't have to go and innovate in Silicon Valley. You can innovate in your own country.
Absolutely. So that's a lot of food for thought. And you obviously have an enormous amount of experience in different regions in all of this. But I'm afraid we are out of time. It's been an engrossing discussion. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
And I was in conversation with Elena Panaritis, who is a world-renowned economist and leader of Thought for Action. Thank you very much to you at home for watching. Don't go away because the news is coming up next. Have a great evening.
TV1 TV for life. Sri Lankans welcome the dawn of the new year.